It seems like today it's almost impossible for any new show to even hit 100 episodes, whether it's because episode orders are just inherently shorter, so it'll take forever, or shows get canceled so much faster. But it almost used to be always common during my childhood for shows like Adventure Time or Regular Show or Gumball to hit 100 pretty quickly. And today I thought, hey, why not look at Thomas and Friends, every 100 episode milestone? Considering the series has hit the 5 milestones 100, 200, 300, 400, and 500, and hell, even got close to 600, why not we look back at all of them and see which one celebrated the milestone the best? Also, to make it clear, I'm going by airing order and not production order. I know there's a bit of a difference, so I just want to make that clear here, just in case you're confused as to why these episodes are the spots they are, as opposed to other ones that also have those. Just got that out of the way. So let's get started with... We start off with the 100th episode, Thomas and the Special Letters. In a way, I'd say it's a really good celebration. I think it shows how far the show has come in over 100 episodes, having almost every major standard gauge engine pop up. It's a pretty simple but charming story about Topham getting a letter from a little girl wanting to see Thomas and all his friends. And it features Thomas getting into a pretty big crash. And all around, this episode just has a pretty good feel to it. Would I call it the best episode of Season 4? Not really. There's episodes like Grandpuff and Sleeping Beauty in there. But still, for what it is a good, charming episode that I think functions really well as episode 100. It shows how far the show has come. You get to see the visual evolution, putting episode 1 to episode 100 back to back with each other. I'll admit the story is kind of dumb. I like the Railway series version better, where Topham's trying to prove to England engines have faces, having just some little girl write about them, and Topham's like, let's stop the workflow and bring 8 of my engines to England. Bit odd, but I can suspend my disbelief just a little bit. The show and the books are not the same. Just gotta accept that this event is gonna happen just a little differently. But yeah, this is a pretty good one. And I think the reason this works well as an 100th episode is because it was actually made to be the 100th episode. Yeah, going forward, all these episodes are just random episodes that just happen to hit their milestones. So that's worth keeping in mind when we talk about these. But yeah, episode 100, good. I think I've said everything I needed to. Now let's move on to... As Good as Gordon became Thomas and Friends' 200th episode, and where I would say the 100th episode showed how much forward the series had gone, I'd say As Good as Gordon shows how further back the show has gone going into Season 8. It's an episode about Emily being able to pull the express. However, she doesn't listen to how to do it properly, so she just messes up the job consistently, and she has to learn patience. It's just a pretty standard moral episode. And having it as episode 200, I feel like it shows that with episode 100, the island of Sodor has expanded and grown its world so much. This episode just shows how sterile and pretty uninteresting Sodor has become. It's definitely not the worst episode of Season 8, there definitely were other bad ones, but judging it as a celebration episode, this wasn't really one that I think represented the milestone number pretty well. It's just a pretty bland episode that was made worse by being episode 200 and really puts into perspective 100 episodes later how far back the show is going. Let's hope they redeem themselves with episode... episode 300 is in season 12. That's not good. Is what I would say if thankfully the 300th episode actually landed on the only good episode of season 12. I don't know if this was intentional or if it was planned or if it's just a coincidence, what have you. But James Works It Out is actually a pretty good episode about James and Hector having to work out their issues, perfect in the title. Not only is this a pretty fun episode, but it actually does use a plot point from the franchise's James' rivalry with trucks. Heck, if you look back at James' earlier book, he did have trouble with trucks before. Not to mention all the consecutive TV appearances. So this is the first time he's actually had to learn to trust a truck and get along with one. Das Bachter actually made a really good video about how well of an arc this is, but in general, not only did it have continuity with the previous season where James was very scared of Hector, but it actually develops his character and has to teach him to learn to trust someone that he really doesn't want to trust. Compared to Thomas and the Special Letters, it doesn't have the same grandiose appeal that one had, being the 100th episode, but I like the fact episode 300 was a pretty normal episode that just dealt with a certain aspect of James' character, intentional or not. It actually works here. Shockingly, being positive to season 12, I never thought I'd see the day. But yeah, James works it out, blows the water out of As Good as Gordon. But now let's see, can they make it up with our first CGI milestone? It's weird to me that they skipped the Miller era, but with the lower episode count, I guess this was going to happen. But nah, the 400th episode lands in season 17, right at the beginning of the Brenner era, with the Thomas Way. Thomas and Duck have to deliver Harold to the Sodor Search and Rescue Center, but inconveniences keep happening. This is another episode I do quite enjoy, though I will say, unlike 100 and even 300, it doesn't seem to use a lot of threads of the franchise's history to celebrate its 400th milestone, instead predominantly focusing on an old character who hasn't gotten much attention since really season 4 up to this point in time, which I will say, it's pretty cool. Not to mention they teamed him up with Thomas, a character Duck weirdly rarely interacts with. I think season 6's Scaredy Engines was the only other real notable time Thomas and Duck interacted. But the two are put against each other, they have to come over their differences, and have to learn to get along. I mean, if you believe in the Thomas hates Duck theory, then this episode's perfect for you. But in general, this is just a pretty good episode that just happened to land on episode 400, It doesn't do anything too mind-blowing. It's just, you like Duck, you like Thomas, you want to see them in an episode together. This is a pretty good one. And really, that's all it really needs to be. If anything, I think it marks a series quality boost again in terms of episode writing, going from the later model seasons. So let's wrap up with the... Thankfully, episode 500, similar to 400 being the beginning of the Brenner era, 500 is the end of the Brenner era, with season 21's PA problems. Topham gets a new PA system, however, it doesn't work as well as he wants to think it does, so Edward has to get the old PA system back. A very simple story, but really feels pretty Audrey-inspired. This seems like something I could see being in the Railway series in general, of Topham getting a new system and it just doesn't work very well and things go wrong on the railway. It's a really good railway story and even puts Edward at the forefront about old things still being pretty useful. I'll definitely say, out of all the episodes, it definitely feels like the most traditional kind of Thomas episode to be the 500th. If anything, I think it shows that even this late into the series, they can still tell these classic stories that Wilbert would have told. However, doing it in a modern style in season 21 with things that wouldn't have been possible to do back in the 1940s and with characters that didn't even exist when the Railway series was brand new. So in many ways, I actually really like it as a celebration, because to me it blends what could feel like a classic Audrey story idea, but with a more recent, nuanced take. Not to mention putting Edward at the forefront, who was the first character in the whole franchise, is another nice bonus, as well, it's an episode about how useful and important he is, which is a story that Audrey told quite a bit with him, always having to prove himself. But yeah, I'm glad to say we end on a high note with episode 500. And in general, it seems like there was always care to put the milestone episodes on at least a pretty competent episode each season, as Good as Gordon from season 8 notwithstanding. But all of them at least celebrated the anniversary, harkened back to the golden days, or just gave us a good episode with those characters. I wouldn't say this series does the best job celebrating these milestone numbers. If you want a show that does that, watch American Dad. But you can't go wrong with most of them. So, real quick before the video ends, here's a quick ranking from worst to best of which ones did the anniversary celebration. At number 5, we have As Good as Gordon, pretty nothing special episode, so moving on. Number 4, we have The Thomas Way, a fun episode with cool character interactions that we don't get to see very often, but not too much else. Still, I like the episode. Number 3 would be James Works It Out, because it actually follows up a plot point from previous seasons about James and his trouble with trucks. I do think they did a good job with that. Number 2 would be episode 500 with PA problems, because it harkens back to the classic storytelling that Wilbur popularized, however doing a modern twist with it. And at number 1, to no one's surprise, would be Thomas and the Special Letters, for how far it moved the series and for just how charming and fun it is as an 100th episode. But yeah, I'd love to hear what your guys' favorite milestone episodes of Thomas are. Tell me in the comments below. And, well, I'll see you next time. Peace out.